Hello and welcome back to the English Talk community. I'm Julia, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Whether you're walking to work, cooking dinner, or just relaxing with your headphones on, this time is for you. This space is a place where you don't have to feel pressure or perfection. We are here to practice together, to grow step by step, and to make the English you hear around you feel more natural and less stressful. So first, let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever watched a movie, a TV show, or a YouTube video in English and felt like everyone was talking too fast? Like you could only catch one word out of 5? Or maybe you've paused a video 10 times just to understand a single sentence. If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. I've met learners from all over the world who feel the same way. They tell me, Julia, I studied English in school, I know the grammar, I even read well, but when native speakers talk in real life, I feel completely lost. And every time, I tell them this: what you're experiencing is normal. It's not a problem with you. It's not because your brain isn't fast enough. It's because natural spoken English, especially the American variety, doesn't sound like what we see in textbooks or classroom dialogues. People don't speak with perfect sentences. They speak in rhythms. They drop sounds. They blend words. They use idioms, expressions, shortcuts. And unless you've had regular contact with that kind of English, of course it's going to feel overwhelming at first. That's exactly why I created this episode. Today, I want to help you understand American English in a more natural, fluent way. I want to take away some of the stress, the guessing, the feeling of failure. I want to help you hear patterns instead of chaos. Because when you start listening differently, your brain begins to adjust. You start to catch phrases, not just words. You begin to predict what's coming next. You start feeling the flow of English instead of translating everything in your head. This is not something that only advanced learners can do. This is something anyone can begin doing, no matter their level, once they understand how to listen with more confidence and less fear. But before we dive in, I want to say something important. I know that many of you listening today are on your own learning journey. Some of you are living in English-speaking countries and trying to survive daily conversations. Others are preparing for job, interviews, international exams, or just dreaming of traveling with confidence. Wherever you are, I want you to know that you belong here. You are not behind. You are not too late. And most importantly, you are not the only one who struggles to understand fast, fluent, native-level English. This podcast is a space for all of us. We learn together. We grow together, and every single listener here helps make this community stronger. So if this episode resonates with you so far, I invite you to take one small action that helps not just you, but others too. Subscribe to this podcast, leave a like, share it with a friend who's also learning English. It may seem like a small thing, but every click, every subscription, helps this content reach someone who might feel lost or discouraged. When you support this podcast, you're helping someone else say, wait, I'm not the only one? You're helping someone feel less alone in their journey, and that is something powerful. Now I know that sometimes English content can feel serious or academic, and I want you to know, that's not what we do here. This is not a classroom. This is a conversation. I don't want you to feel like you need to sit with a notebook and write everything down perfectly. I don't want you to worry about mistakes or complicated grammar rules. I want you to feel like we're just talking, like I'm right here with you, guiding you, sharing what works, and reminding you that fluency comes from connection, not from you pressure. So take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and let your ears do the learning today. Because listening is a powerful skill. It's often underestimated, but it's the key to unlocking fluency. When you start to understand how native speakers really talk, you begin to absorb the rhythm of the language. You start hearing patterns. You begin to feel the meaning of phrases without needing to translate them. And slowly, something amazing happens. You start thinking in English, not just understanding individual words, but feeling entire ideas. And once you can do that, speaking becomes easier too. I've seen this happen again and again with students and listeners from different parts of the world. People just like you. A young woman from Rome who told me she used to be afraid to speak at her internship in Chicago because she couldn't follow meetings. A guy from Munich who could write essays but couldn't keep up with conversations and movies. A university student from Marseille who froze every time someone asked her a question in a video call. These people didn't lack vocabulary. They just needed a new way to listen, a way that felt real, human, and doable. And that's exactly what we'll explore in today's episode. I'll share real-life stories, practical tips, and listening strategies that help you go from overwhelmed to connected. I'll show you how to train your ear to understand fast English, not by memorizing more, but by hearing patterns, learning chunks, and building natural habits. I'll also introduce you to characters from different cities across Europe who have found their own path to listening fluency. Not through perfection, but through practice. And through that, I hope you'll see yourself in their journeys and feel inspired to continue yours. So wherever you are in the world, however fluent you feel today, you are part of this conversation. And I'm here with you. Let's begin. When people first start learning English, they often believe that if they memorize enough words and study enough grammar rules, they will be able to understand anyone who speaks the language. That's what we're taught in school. We go through exercises, we fill in blanks, we memorize verb charts, and we read formal texts. But then, we turn on a real conversation, a podcast, a movie, or a video call with native speakers, and suddenly, everything feels different. Fast, unpredictable, even messy. Many learners feel confused. They think, I studied so much. Why can't I understand this? And that's the moment when many people start blaming themselves. They think they're not smart enough or not trying hard enough. But the truth is, the problem isn't you. The problem is the gap between the English you studied and the English that people actually speak. Textbook English is like a clean, polished version of the language. It's slow, clear, and carefully structured. It's designed to teach rules, which is helpful when you're beginning. But spoken English in real life, especially American English, is very different. It's full of reduced sounds, contractions, connected speech, unfinished sentences, interruptions, slang, and cultural references. When native speakers talk to each other, they're not thinking about grammar rules. They're thinking about getting their message across quickly and naturally. That's why they often say gonna instead of going to, or lemme instead of let me. They might drop entire words and expect the listener to fill in the blanks, based on context. And they do this unconsciously, all the time. Once you understand this difference, something shifts. You begin to realize that struggling to understand fluent English doesn't mean you're bad at English. It just means that what you've studied isn't the same as what you're hearing now. And that's okay. It's not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're transitioning from classroom English to real-world English. That's a powerful step. When you accept this reality, you start to let go of some of the pressure. You stop expecting yourself to understand every single word, and you start focusing on the bigger picture, on the rhythm, the tone, the phrases that repeat, and the ideas behind the words. That's when real learning begins. One of the most frustrating things I hear from learners is that they feel like they're stuck in the middle. They can read articles, understand written instructions, maybe even write emails in English. But when they try to watch a series or follow a fast conversation, they feel lost. They try to use the same strategies they used for reading, decoding every word, translating everything in their heads. But listening doesn't work like reading. In listening, time doesn't stop. You can't pause real people mid-sentence and analyze their grammar. You have to respond in real time. And that's what makes listening such a unique and sometimes difficult skill. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. Fluent English, especially the way Americans speak in casual settings, often breaks all the rules you learned. For example, instead of saying, "What are you going to do about it?" someone might say, "What you gonna do about it?" That might sound like a joke, but it's real. It's how people speak naturally in everyday life. If you've never been exposed to that style of speaking, it makes perfect sense that it would sound confusing at first. Think about it. Even native English speakers sometimes struggle to understand people from different regions or backgrounds because of how much variation there is in spoken language. So of course, learners are going to need time and practice to adjust their ears. That's not weakness. That's just part of the process. Let me tell you about a listener I met recently, Elena, from Frankfurt. She studied English for more than 10 years. She passed exams with great scores. But when she moved to Seattle for work, she was shocked. In meetings, she could understand most of what was said. But in the kitchen, during lunch breaks, she felt completely out of place. People were talking quickly, making jokes, using phrases she had never seen in any textbook. She told me she felt stupid, like all her years of learning meant nothing. But when we talked more, she realized something important. She had never practiced understanding that kind of English, the casual, fast, real-world version. Once she stopped blaming herself and started practicing with authentic materials, things began to change. She started listening to podcasts where people spoke naturally. She began recognizing expressions, picking up on tone and pauses. Slowly, she started feeling more confident, even when she didn't catch every single word. Stories like Elena's are common. And what they show us is that the biggest obstacle isn't your ability, it's your expectations. When we expect real conversations to sound like textbook dialogues, we set ourselves up for disappointment. But when we start listening with curiosity, instead of pressure, we begin to notice patterns. We begin to learn like native speakers learned, by hearing, noticing, imitating, and repeating. I know many of you listening right now have had moments when you felt discouraged. Maybe you avoided speaking because you were afraid you wouldn't understand the reply. Maybe you stopped watching shows in English because it felt like too much work. But what if I told you that these moments of confusion are not failures? They're signs that your brain is expanding. They're signs that you've reached the edge of your comfort zone and that you're about to grow. You're being exposed to real English, and even if it feels messy, your brain is already beginning to adapt. This process doesn't require perfection. It requires patience. It requires you to show up again and again and let your ears do the work. It requires you to give yourself permission to not understand everything, to let go of the need to translate every sentence, and to start trusting your intuition. And the good news is, you don't have to do this alone. That's what this community is for. Every episode we create here is designed to help you get a little closer to that natural, fluent understanding of English, not through memorization, but through connection. So today, I want you to remind yourself that the way native speakers talk is different from what you were taught, and that's not your fault. It's just the next stage in your journey, and you are absolutely capable of reaching it. Let me tell you about someone I met a while ago. Her name is Marta, and she's originally from Barcelona. Like many of you, she had studied English for years. She knew the grammar rules, had a decent vocabulary, and even felt pretty confident reading articles and watching TV shows with English subtitles. But when she moved to Los Angeles for work, everything changed. She wasn't prepared for how different spoken English would feel in real life. In the office, during meetings, she could follow along most of the time, especially when people spoke slowly or used more formal language. But lunchtime was a completely different experience. At lunch, people spoke casually, quickly, and without much structure. They laughed, joked, interrupted each other, and used expressions that Marta had never seen in any textbook. They would say things like, "I'm beat," or "want to grab something real quick." And Marta would sit there, smiling politely, pretending to follow, while inside she felt completely disconnected. She told me that she started avoiding those social moments, afraid someone might talk directly to her and she wouldn't know how to respond. It made her feel small, like she wasn't good enough, even though she had worked so hard to learn the language. For a while, she tried using subtitles to help her at home. She would watch American shows with English subtitles, thinking that it would train her ears. But what happened was something that many learners experience. She began reading more than listening. Her eyes would move faster than the voices, and she would start focusing on the text instead of the sounds. So when someone spoke to her in real life, where there were no subtitles to help, the confusion came back. It felt like she was stuck, and no matter how much she studied, she couldn't break through that barrier. One day, while riding the bus to work, Marta was scrolling through her phone and came across a podcast episode about daily English conversations. It wasn't a formal lesson. It was just two people talking about their day, about things like going to the grocery store or dealing with a noisy neighbor. She plugged in her headphones and decided to listen, not to study, but just to pass the time. And something interesting happened. At first, it was difficult. She didn't understand every sentence, but instead of giving up, she kept listening. And instead of trying to catch every word, she began paying attention to the rhythm, the tone, the rise and fall of the voices. She started noticing patterns. how certain phrases came up again and again, how speakers used the same expressions to agree, to pause, to react. She stopped trying to understand every word and started focusing on chunks, short phrases that carried meaning together. Phrases like, I guess so, that makes sense, you know what I mean, kind of, and not really. She realized that these little expressions were the real building blocks of casual English. And because she wasn't stopping the audio or translating in her head, her ears got used to the natural flow. Marta made a decision to turn her bus rides into her listening time. Every day, for 20 to 30 minutes, she listened to casual podcasts. She didn't take notes. She didn't repeat or pause. She just listened with focus. And she made a small but powerful rule for herself. She wasn't going to worry about understanding everything. She would just let the language wash over her and trust that her brain would begin to adapt. And that's exactly what happened. After just a couple of weeks, something changed. One afternoon at lunch, one of her coworkers made a joke, and she understood it. Not just the words, but the feeling behind it. She laughed naturally and even responded. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't rehearsed. But it was real. Her coworkers noticed. One of them said, "Hey, your English is getting really good." And Marta felt something shift inside her. She felt proud. Not because she had memorized new grammar, but because she was finally connecting. She told me that once she stopped chasing perfection and started listening to real people talking about real things, everything became easier. Her confidence grew. She began jumping into conversations more often, even if she made mistakes. And she realized that understanding spoken English wasn't about being smarter or studying harder. It was about listening differently, about letting go of the pressure to understand everything and instead tuning into the sounds, the rhythm, and the connection behind the words. Now, when she watches shows, she does it without subtitles. Not because she understands every single thing, but because she's learned to listen for meaning instead of trying to catch every word. She feels the language now, and that has made all the difference. Today, I want to share with you one of the most effective listening strategies I've ever taught, something that has helped countless learners move from confusion to real connection. It's simple, practical, and you can start using it right away. I call it the chunk strategy. The idea is this. Instead of trying to understand English word by word, you focus on whole chunks of language, small groups of words that naturally go together. These chunks are how native speakers really speak and how they actually think. Once you learn to hear and use them, listening becomes faster, easier, and far less stressful. Let me explain why this matters. When we learn a new language, we're often taught to break it down into parts. We memorize individual words, we study grammar rules, we build sentences piece by piece. And while that's helpful in the beginning, it doesn't reflect how real language works in everyday conversation. Native speakers don't speak in isolated words. They speak in chunks. Instead of saying, "I'm going to leave now," they say, "I'm going to head out." Instead of saying, "Do you understand me?" they say, "You know what I mean?" These aren't random shortcuts. They're natural patterns that native speakers use without thinking. And once your ear starts picking up on these patterns, you begin to understand more, even when people speak quickly. Listening for chunks is like tuning into the music of the language. Each chunk has a rhythm, a tone, a shape. And once you hear it a few times, your brain starts to recognize it automatically. You stop needing to translate. You stop getting stuck on every word. You start feeling the meaning instead of thinking about the grammar. This is exactly how children learn their first language. They don't learn by studying grammar. They learn by hearing the same chunks again and again in different situations until they know what they mean and how they sound. And the good news is, adults can do the same thing. You just have to shift your focus. So how do you actually practice this? One of the best ways is by watching series in English, especially shows with natural, everyday dialogue. Pick a scene that you enjoy. It could be from a comedy, a drama, even a reality show. Play the scene once with English subtitles and listen carefully. Don't try to understand every word. Just notice how people speak. Pay attention to the small expressions they use. Then, play the scene again, this time without subtitles, and try to identify a few chunks that stand out. You'll begin to hear phrases like, "I don't know," "kind of," "we'll see," Let me think. Sounds good. No worries. Come on. Or I gotta go. These are chunks. They're not full sentences, but they carry meaning, emotion, and intent. Once you've found a few of these chunks, pause the video and repeat them out loud. Not just once, but a few times. Try to copy the rhythm and the intonation. Feel the flow. This is not about memorizing a list. It's about getting used to how English sounds when it's spoken naturally. After a few days of doing this, your ears will start to recognize the same chunks in other conversations. You'll start to notice that people use them all the time, and slowly, you'll begin to use them yourself, without even thinking. Another great way to practice chunks is by listening to music. Choose a song in English that has clear, simple lyrics, something you enjoy listening to more than once. Play the song a few times and write down the phrases that repeat. Notice how the singer connects words, how they pronounce them, and how certain lines flow together. You'll see that songs are full of chunks, phrases like take it easy, let it go, make it right, hold on tight. These phrases might be simple, but they're powerful. And the more you listen, the more natural they'll feel. What's important here is that you're training your ear, not your memory. You're helping your brain recognize real English as it's spoken by real people, not just the version you see in textbooks. You're building a sense of familiarity with the language, which is what allows you to understand without needing to translate everything in your head. And that's a huge step toward fluency. I've had students from all over the world use this method, and they're often surprised by how quickly they improve. One woman from Vienna told me she spent years trying to understand every single word in a sentence, and it left her frustrated. But once she started focusing on chunks, she began understanding entire conversations without translating. A man from Porto shared that he used to feel lost during group chats at work, but now he listens for key expressions and feels much more comfortable responding. The difference wasn't in how many words they knew. It was in how they listened. The chunk strategy also helps reduce anxiety. When you stop focusing on every individual word, you stop feeling overwhelmed. You begin to realize that even if you miss a word, you can still understand the message. That's how native speakers listen too. They don't catch every word all the time. They listen for meaning, tone, and familiar phrases. And that's what you're learning to do when you train your ear with chunks. You don't need a lot of time to make this work. Even 10 minutes a day can bring big results. The key is consistency. Make it part of your daily routine. Pick a scene from your favorite show, a short podcast, or a song you love. Find 2 or 3 chunks. Listen, repeat, and pay attention to how they sound. Use them in your own sentences. Say them out loud in the mirror. Whisper them when you're walking. Make them part of your voice. Over time, these chunks become part of your internal language. They help you speak more naturally, understand more quickly, and feel more confident in any situation. You stop guessing and start connecting. And the more you connect with the rhythm and flow of English, the closer you get to thinking in English, not through force, but through familiarity. That's the power of listening the right way. That's the power of the chunk strategy. Let me tell you a story that I think many of you will relate to. It's about someone named Luca, a mechanical engineer from Milan who had studied English for most of his life. He was hardworking, intelligent, and very dedicated to improving his language skills. He had taken courses, passed exams, and even traveled to English-speaking countries for short periods. On paper, his English looked great. But whenever he had to speak or listen in real time, especially in fast conversations, everything seemed to fall apart. He told me that even a simple chat with a colleague from the UK felt exhausting. Every time someone spoke, his brain would go into overdrive. He would hear the English, quickly translate it into Italian in his mind, try to form a response in Italian, and then translate that response back into English before opening his mouth. By the time he was ready to speak, the conversation had already moved on. This pattern made him feel stuck. He said that speaking felt like doing mental gymnastics. He couldn't relax. He couldn't enjoy conversations. Even worse, he began avoiding situations where he might need to speak spontaneously. And when he did speak, he sounded robotic and unsure. Not because he didn't know the words, but because he was trapped in a loop of translation. He believed he had to understand every word perfectly before he could respond. He believed that if he didn't translate, he would say something wrong. and that belief kept him from making progress. One day, while trying to find new listening materials online, Luca came across a video about a technique called shadowing. It was a simple idea. Listen to native English audio and repeat what you hear immediately, word for word, trying to match the rhythm, tone, and speed of the speaker. You don't pause the audio. You don't stop to translate. You don't worry if you don't understand every word. You just follow the speaker's voice as closely as you can, like an echo. At first, Luca wasn't sure if it would help. It sounded strange to repeat things without understanding them completely. But he was tired of feeling stuck, so he gave it a try. He started with short podcast episodes and movie scenes, just 2 or 3 minutes at a time. He would play the audio and speak along, trying to match the sounds. It felt awkward in the beginning. His tongue didn't want to move fast enough. He stumbled over the words. He got lost in the sentences. But he kept going. He didn't stop to correct himself or check the meaning. He just listened and echoed. Day after day, he practiced this for 10 or 15 minutes. And slowly, something began to change. After a couple of weeks, he noticed that the sentences he was repeating started to feel familiar. He didn't have to think about them anymore. They came out of his mouth naturally. He was no longer translating every word. Instead, he began to understand full phrases as they were. He said that it was like his brain had finally stopped translating and started absorbing. One day, during a video call with a colleague, he noticed something else. He was speaking without planning. He was reacting in real time. He didn't have to build the sentence in Italian first. It just came out. That was a big moment for him. Not because he was perfect, but because he felt free. He told me that the biggest shift wasn't just in his listening or speaking, it was in his mindset. He stopped trying to control every part of the conversation. He stopped judging himself for not understanding every word. And because of that, he became more present. He started listening for meaning, not for grammar. He started noticing the emotion behind the words. And because his focus was on the speaker, not on his inner voice, he understood more and responded faster. Luca's story is powerful because it shows that fluency isn't just about vocabulary or grammar. It's about breaking the habit of translation. It's about trusting yourself to listen and respond in the moment. And it's about giving yourself permission to make mistakes while you build real fluency. When you shadow native speakers, you're not just copying sounds. You're training your brain to think in English. You're creating new neural pathways. You're developing a sense of how the language flows, how sentences are formed, how tone and rhythm shape meaning. And you're doing it through practice, not pressure. He also shared something that really stayed with me. He said, "At first I thought I needed to translate everything to understand, but when I stopped translating, I actually understood more." That's the secret that so many learners miss. Translation feels like control, but it often blocks real understanding. When you let go of that control, you allow your brain to process English as English. And that's when real listening happens. That's when you stop surviving conversations and start participating in them. Now, Luca listens to English podcasts without subtitles. He watches interviews and live streams and enjoys them, even if he misses a few words. He says things like, "sounds about right," and "that's fair," and "let me think," phrases he picked up during his shadowing practice. These expressions weren't taught in his grammar books. He learned them by hearing them, repeating them, and using them. And that's what makes them part of his natural voice. His story is a reminder that understanding and speaking fluent English isn't about perfection. It's about learning to think in the language, to trust your instincts, and to train your ears and mouth together. If you find yourself translating every sentence in your head, if you feel like conversations are too fast or too difficult, try shadowing. Just 5 or 10 minutes a day can make a huge difference. Repeat what you hear, feel the rhythm, don't stop to analyze, and let your brain adjust. That's how Luca made the leap from translation to fluency, and that's how you can too. One of the things I hear most often from learners is how frustrating it is when native English speakers talk fast. I've had so many people say to me, "Julia, I can read and write pretty well, and I understand English in class or in slow recordings, but when people speak fast, I feel completely lost." It's a very common experience, and if you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. The speed of native English can feel overwhelming at first. It can seem chaotic, rushed, and even unfair. But today, I want to help you look at fast English in a different way. What if I told you that speed isn't your enemy? What if I told you that it's actually a clue, a powerful clue, that can help you understand English more easily, not less? Let's start by thinking about how native speakers really speak. When you hear someone talking quickly, it's easy to assume that they're using more words, more complex grammar, or that they're somehow speaking above your level. But in reality, that's not what's happening. Native speakers don't use complicated structures all the time. In fact, when people speak quickly, they're usually relying on very familiar, predictable patterns. They say the same expressions, the same phrases, over and over again. These patterns are repeated in everyday speech because they're easy to say and easy to understand for those who know how to listen for them. Speed in English is more about rhythm than about difficulty. It's like music. When you first hear a song in a new style, maybe jazz or rap, you might not catch the lyrics right away. But more you listen, the more your ears adjust. You begin to feel the beat, the flow, and eventually, the words become clearer. The same thing happens with English. Fast speech has a rhythm. Native speakers don't pronounce every word clearly and separately. They blend words together. They stress some syllables and reduce others. And when you understand this rhythm, you begin to hear the language differently. One of the best ways to understand this is with real examples. Let's take the sentence, did you eat yet? In careful English, you might hear each word pronounced clearly, but in natural, fast American English, that sentence often becomes "jeet yet?" It sounds completely different, but it's not random. It's a predictable change. Did you becomes G, eat stays the same, and yet keeps its place, but everything is blended and shortened. If you try to hear each word individually, it might sound like nonsense. But if you learn to expect this pattern, suddenly it makes sense. Another example, what do you want to do? This can easily become, what do you want to do? Again, it's not lazy speech or sloppy grammar. It's just the way people talk when they're comfortable and casual. These blends are part of fluent, connected English. They follow a rhythm that native speakers grow up with and that you can learn to recognize over time. The key is to stop fighting the speed and start listening for the patterns underneath. When I work with students on this, I tell them to stop thinking of fast English as something to decode word by word. Instead, treat it like a wave that you can ride. Listen for the stressed words, the ones that carry the meaning. The rest of the sentence often contains reduced or blended words that serve a grammatical purpose, but don't carry the main idea. For example, in the sentence, I'm gonna go to the store, the main meaning comes from gonna go and store. The I'm and to the are important, but they're not where the focus is. If you can catch the key words, you'll understand the point, even if you miss some of the connecting pieces. I know that at first, this can feel strange. Many learners have been trained to focus on perfect pronunciation, on hearing each word clearly. But fluent English isn't about clear separation, it's about flow. And the faster someone speaks, the more predictable that flow becomes. People rely on habits when they speak quickly. They use the same expressions, the same word combinations, and that's your advantage. If you listen often enough, you'll start to notice those habits. You'll begin to hear that going to almost always sounds like gonna, that want to becomes wanna, and that got to sounds like gotta. I remember a listener from Lyon who shared how this shift in mindset helped her. She used to pause videos constantly, trying to catch every word. It made her tired and frustrated. But after we talked about rhythm and blending, she started watching short clips without pausing, just listening for the general idea. She stopped trying to hear every single word and instead listened for the overall flow. After a few weeks, she began catching entire phrases she used to miss. Her ears had adapted, not because she had learned more vocabulary, but because she had learned how to listen differently. If you find fast English frustrating, try this. Take a short audio clip, no more than 1 minute, and play it several times. Don't try to write anything down at first. Just listen. On the first play, notice the general meaning. On the second, listen for repeated phrases or patterns. On the third, try shadowing. Repeat what you hear as quickly and closely as you can. You'll stumble, and that's okay. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is to let your ears and mouth move together in rhythm with the language. This process works best when you use content that reflects natural speech. Interviews, casual podcasts, short scenes from shows or movies. These sources show you how real people talk, not how scripts are written, and over time, you'll begin to hear fast English as something familiar, not something scary. You'll start recognizing that what once sounded like a blur is actually full of patterns you already know. There's nothing wrong with needing time to adjust to fast speech. It's a skill, just like learning to drive or play an instrument. At first, it feels too fast, too much. But the more you practice, the more your brain starts recognizing the patterns, and eventually, everything slows down in your mind, even when the speaker keeps going at full speed. So remember, fast English isn't a wall you can't climb. It's a rhythm you can learn to dance with. And every time you listen with attention, without judgment, your ears become stronger, your understanding becomes faster, and your confidence grows. Speed is not the enemy. It's part of the language's beauty, and it's something you can absolutely learn to understand. I often get asked, Julia, what's the best way to improve my listening skills without spending hours every day? And I understand the question completely. Most people are busy. You have jobs, families, responsibilities. You can't always sit for an hour with textbooks or do long listening exercises. But the good news is that you don't need to study for hours to see real progress. What really matters is consistency, creating simple, focused habits that you can repeat every day. These small routines, even if they take just 5 or 10 minutes, can make a big difference if you stick with them. So today, I want to share 3 daily listening habits that actually work. They're easy to start, they don't require any special tools, and they train your brain to process real English the way native speakers use it. The first habit is one of the most powerful. Listen to short native English clips twice. That's it. Just pick a short video, podcast segment, or scene from a show, something 1 to 3 minutes long, and listen to it twice. The first time, use English subtitles. The goal is to understand the main message and notice any words or chunks that are unfamiliar. Don't pause or take notes. Just watch or listen and absorb the sound and the meaning together. Then, on the second play, turn the subtitles off. Listen again, and this time, focus on the rhythm and the connection between words. Notice how the speaker moves from one phrase to another. Try to hear the chunks, the reductions, and the tone. You don't need to understand every word on them. Second, listen. What you're doing is training your ear to recognize the flow of natural English. Over time, your brain starts to predict what comes next. It begins to recognize the phrases native speakers use over and over. This habit takes just a few minutes a day, but it helps you build real-world listening skills. You're not just learning vocabulary. You're learning how English sounds when it's spoken quickly, casually, and naturally. The second habit is about focus. When you're watching or listening to English content, choose one speaker to follow at a time. Especially in interviews, panel discussions, or group scenes, there can be multiple voices, and each speaker has a different rhythm, accent, and style. So instead of trying to understand everyone, pick one person and tune into their voice. Listen closely to their pacing, their intonation, and their favorite expressions. Each speaker gives you a new example of how English can sound, and focusing on just one helps your brain adapt more quickly. For example, if you're watching an interview with an actor or a public figure, choose to follow only that person's responses. If you're listening to a podcast with 2 or 3 hosts, focus on just one speaker for the whole episode. You'll notice how their speech flows, what kind of chunks they use, and how they express agreement, doubt, excitement, or hesitation. You'll begin to hear their style, and that's an important part of building your own natural listening and speaking rhythm. The third habit is writing, but not in a way that feels like homework. After listening to something in English, a video, a podcast, a song, take just 2 or 3 minutes to write down the new chunks or expressions you heard. Not individual words, but short phrases. Maybe you heard, "I'm not so sure," "sounds good to me," "let me think," or "you know what I mean." Write those down. These are the real pieces of language that make conversations flow. They're not formal. They're not textbook English. They're the way people actually talk. Once you've written down a few new chunks, take a moment to use them in your own sentences. You don't need to write a paragraph. Just write 1 or 2 sentences that feel natural. For example, if you wrote down, I guess so, you could write, are you coming to the meeting? I guess so, if I finish on time. If you heard, no big deal, maybe write, he forgot to call, but it's no big deal. These quick examples help you internalize the I phrases so they become part of your own speaking. This habit is powerful because it connects listening with speaking. You're not just passively hearing language, you're actively working with it. You're training your brain to recognize useful patterns and preparing your mouth to use them. And over time, these small bits of practice add up. You'll start to recognize the same chunks in different contexts. You'll feel more confident jumping into conversations. And you'll notice that your listening comprehension improves naturally because your brain is already familiar with how English is used in real life. I've seen these 3 habits change the way people learn. One listener from Lisbon told me she used to feel stuck every time she watched a show in English. She'd pause constantly, look up words, and end up feeling frustrated. But when she started listening to short clips twice, first with subtitles, then without, she realized that she didn't need to understand every word to follow the story. She began to hear repeated phrases, and her brain started to fill in the gaps. She also started focusing on one actor's speech in each scene, and that helped her get used to different accents. After a few weeks, she wrote to me and said, I feel like I'm finally hearing the language, not just studying it. Another learner from Amsterdam shared how writing down chunks helped him become more comfortable in meetings at his international company. He kept a small notebook where he wrote down natural expressions he heard during conference calls. Every morning, he would review 2 or 3 of them and create quick examples in his head. After a month, his coworkers began to notice. He sounded more fluent, more relaxed, more like himself in English. These stories remind me that fluency is not something you reach by force. It's something you build through habits. Daily, simple, repeatable actions that connect you with the real sound and rhythm of English. You don't need a perfect method or perfect materials. You need consistency, curiosity, and a little bit of courage to stay with the process. These habits work because they fit into your real life. They're flexible, they're short, and they give you control over your learning. So if you've been feeling stuck with listening or unsure of how to practice, try these habits. They may seem small, but they're powerful. Listen twice, once with subtitles, once without. Focus on one speaker. Write down new chunks and use them. That's how you train your ear, your brain, and your voice all at the same time. That's how listening becomes something natural, something familiar, and eventually something that feels easy. Let me introduce you to someone whose story I think will speak directly to many of you. Her name is Sophia, and she's from Lisbon. When I first heard from her, she was feeling completely overwhelmed by her English studies. She had been using apps, flashcards, grammar books, everything she could find. Her phone was filled with screenshots of vocabulary lists, and her notebooks were covered in grammar rules, verb tenses, irregular verbs, and more. But even with all that effort, Sophia didn't feel any closer to actually speaking English confidently. In fact, the more she tried to remember everything she was learning, the more anxious and self-conscious she became. She told me that conversations made her freeze. Her mind would go blank, and even simple responses felt impossible. It wasn't because she didn't care or wasn't smart. Sophia is thoughtful, motivated, and had a real passion for learning. But all the pressure to remember perfect grammar and endless vocabulary left her feeling stuck. One day, while listening to an English podcast, she heard a speaker say something simple. Sounds good to me. It wasn't a complicated sentence. It didn't use rare words. But something about the way it was said, so natural, so casual, so real, made her pause. She realized in that moment that maybe what she needed wasn't more words. Maybe what she needed was to go deeper with fewer words. So she made a small decision that would end up changing everything. Instead of trying to memorize 20 new words a day or study complicated grammar charts, she decided to focus on just one new phrase a day. One phrase that felt real and useful. One phrase that she could hear, say, write, and use until it became part of her. She called it her sticky note method. Each morning, Sophia would choose a phrase she liked, something she had heard in a podcast or read in a conversation. She'd write it down on a small sticky note and place it on her bathroom mirror, or her desk, or even on her coffee cup. Then, every time she saw it during the day, she would say it out loud. Not just once, but a few times. She would try to say it with the same rhythm and tone she had heard. She wasn't just memorizing it, she was practicing how it felt to say it naturally. Her first phrase was, "Sounds good to me." It's simple, right? But it's incredibly common in casual English. You can use it to agree with someone, to accept a suggestion, or just to sound easygoing and open. She used it with a friend during a language exchange the same week, and it worked. The conversation flowed. She didn't hesitate. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel nervous about how she sounded. The next day, she picked another phrase. Let me think. Again, something she had heard on a podcast where two people were chatting about what to cook for dinner. She said it to herself in the mirror every time she passed by. She imagined different situations where she could use it. When she joined her next conversation group, she used it naturally when someone asked her a question. Let me think. And then she gave her answer. That pause, that little expression, gave her the space she needed to feel in control. Little by little, Sophia built her own personal library of useful English phrases. She wasn't trying to sound perfect. She wasn't worried about advanced grammar. She was focused on sounding real. And the change in her was noticeable. Her confidence grew, not because she had mastered everything, but because she had something to say that felt natural. She started smiling more during conversations. She listened differently, because now she was also listening for her phrases, for the ones she had learned or the ones she might want to add to her collection. She told me that it became like a little treasure hunt. Every time she listened to a podcast or watched a series, she was looking for those real-life expressions that people use when they're not thinking about grammar. Things like, no worries, that's fair, I'm not sure yet, let's see how it goes. Each one was like a puzzle piece, and with every new phrase, her picture of fluent English became clearer. What I love about Sophia's story is how gentle and effective her method is. It's simple, one phrase a day, but it's also focused. It's connected to listening, speaking, and real communication. And it's something anyone can do. You don't need a language app. You don't need a grammar guide. You just need curiosity, attention, and a sticky note. Or even just a note on your phone. Pick a phrase that feels natural, repeat it with your voice, and try to hear it in the world around you. Sophia also told me that saying the phrases out loud was a game changer. Not just thinking them or reading them, but actually speaking them. She would practice them in the car, on a walk, while brushing her teeth. She said them with different emotions, happy, surprised, tired, so she could hear how the phrase changed in different moods. It made her feel more connected to the language, more expressive, more human. And even though her goal was fluency, what she found along the way was confidence. That quiet, steady confidence that comes from knowing what to say and how to say it. She didn't have to think about conjugating a verb in the middle of a sentence. She didn't have to pause and search her mind for vocabulary. She just spoke, naturally, in her own way. This approach worked because it respected her pace. It took the pressure off and made learning enjoyable again. And most importantly, it focused on real language, the kind that people actually use in daily life. Not perfect textbook examples, but living, breathing expressions that carry emotion, tone, and connection. Every time I think about Sophia's journey, I'm reminded that fluency is built in small, consistent steps. One phrase at a time. Spoken with your own voice. Practiced with intention. Not everything needs to be fast or complicated. Sometimes the most powerful progress comes from slowing down, focusing on what really matters, and building something solid, something that actually works in real conversations. That's exactly what Sophia did, and it's something you can do too. One of the most powerful tools you have in your English learning journey is repetition, and yet so many people avoid it. They think repeating something is boring, or that it means they're not learning fast enough. I hear it all the time. Julia, I already watched that video, or I've listened to that episode once, what's next? And I always smile, because I know something they might not yet. Repetition isn't boring when it's done with intention. In fact, it's one of the smartest ways to train your brain to truly understand and internalize natural English. It's not about memorizing content. It's about creating layers of familiarity and depth that turn passive understanding into active fluency. Let's think about how we learn in real life. When you hear a song you love, how many times do you play it? Probably more than once. And each time, you notice something new, a lyric, a sound, and emotion. It gets stuck in your head, not because you tried to memorize it, but because your brain absorbed it through repetition. The same thing happens with language. When you return to the same episode, the same podcast, the same scene, your brain begins to relax. It stops focusing on survival. What does that word mean? Did I understand that sentence? And starts building real comprehension. I often suggest a simple but effective routine using repetition. Take one episode of a show you like, just one. Maybe something from a series you've already started and enjoy. Not a lesson, not a lecture. A real story with real characters, natural dialogue, and emotional context. First, watch it with English subtitles. Don't pause, don't analyze. Just watch and read. Let your eyes and ears work together. You'll catch a lot, maybe more than you expected. You'll notice expressions, tone, body language. This is your first layer, getting a general feel for the story and the way people speak. Then, after a break or the next day, watch the exact same episode again, but this time without subtitles. Now you're listening more deeply. You already know the context, so your brain is free to, focus on sound. You'll hear the rhythm of sentences. You'll notice how words are connected, where the pauses happen, how emotion shapes the delivery. You might not catch every word, and that's fine. This second layer isn't about understanding everything. It's about training your ear to the music of English. You're building listening strength without even realizing it. The third step is listening to just the audio. No video, no subtitles. Maybe while going for a walk, cleaning your house, or sitting with your eyes closed. You already know the story, so now your brain starts filling in the visual memory from sound alone. You begin to recognize voices, emotions, chunks of language that felt too fast before. And what's amazing is that you'll start hearing things you didn't even notice the first time. The way someone says, "Are you serious?" with rising intonation. The casual, "I don't know," that blends into, "I don't know." These moments were always there, but now your brain is ready to catch them. This is the third layer, deep listening. Each time you go through this process, the same content becomes more alive. You're not just watching or listening, you're learning to hear English in a natural way. And this kind of repetition creates fluency. Not the kind you force, but the kind that grows quietly, like muscle memory. You don't need to move on to a new episode every day. You don't need to constantly chase new vocabulary or unfamiliar accents. What you need is depth, familiarity, connection. And repetition gives you that. I once worked with a student from Berlin who loved a particular comedy series. He had watched the first season in his native language years before and decided to revisit it in English. At first, he watched with subtitles and felt like he only understood 60%, but he liked the story, so he decided to rewatch the episodes again. This time, he turned off the subtitles. He said it was like stepping into a different world. He began hearing phrases that flew past him before. Expressions like, "no way," "you've got to be kidding," or "let's grab something to eat." These weren't new vocabulary items. They were real speech patterns, spoken quickly, connected naturally, filled with emotion. Then he started listening to the audio on his commute, and everything changed. Suddenly, those characters' voices became familiar. He started repeating lines out loud. He felt more confident speaking with coworkers because he had heard real examples of casual conversation, not just studied phrases from a textbook. And what amazed him most was how much he enjoyed it. Repetition didn't feel like study. It felt like getting to know a friend better every time they talked. This kind of listening practice is deeply effective because it mimics how children learn language. They don't demand new stories every day. They watch the same cartoon 20 times. They repeat lines. They play with language. And that repetition builds fluency naturally. You can do the same. In fact, returning to something familiar helps your brain relax. It stops wasting energy on understanding the story and starts focusing on how the language works. I always tell my listeners, stop worrying about quantity. Start focusing on quality. You don't need 50 new videos. You need one good one that you enjoy. One scene, one conversation. That's enough. Explore it, live with it, play it back, listen while you cook, repeat the lines while brushing your teeth. Every time you return to it, you're not wasting time. You're strengthening your ear, deepening your understanding, and giving your brain the repetition it needs to build fluency. If you want to speak English naturally, you need to listen deeply. And deep listening doesn't come from constant variety. It comes from repeated exposure, from falling in love with a voice, a story, a scene, from hearing it again and again until it becomes part of your internal language. It's not boring. It's not slow. It's smart. It's how your brain learns best, and it's something you can do, starting today, with something you already enjoy. That's the power of repetition when it's done with care and curiosity. It transforms familiar content into a training ground for real, lasting fluency. I want to share something that I believe is truly freeing for many English learners. It's a secret that can change the way you approach your listening practice and, honestly, your entire relationship with learning English. So many of us feel guilty about what we watch or listen to in English. We think we should be listening to serious news programs, educational documentaries, or TED Talks because those feel important or helpful for learning. But here's the truth. The best listening practice is not what you think you should do. It's what you actually enjoy. It's what makes you smile, laugh, or feel curious. When you listen to content you love, your brain is awake and engaged. It's more open, more flexible, and more ready to absorb the language naturally. I see this struggle so often with my listeners and students. Someone tells me, "Julia, I want to improve my English listening skills, but I get bored with the podcasts I think I should listen to." Or, "I try to watch documentaries, but my mind drifts and I stop paying attention." That's perfectly normal. We all learn better when we're interested and emotionally connected to the material. The brain responds to pleasure and curiosity with a flood of dopamine, the chemical that helps us focus and remember. So if your listening practice feels like a chore, it won't work as well. What if instead you allowed yourself to listen to that reality show where people argue over cooking or design? What if you gave permission to enjoy stand-up comedy even if some jokes feel tricky at first? What if you found an English-speaking YouTuber who talks about your favorite hobbies, fashion, sports, video games, and followed their videos regularly? These choices might seem less academic, but they can be incredibly effective. When you watch or listen to something that excites you, your brain naturally wants to understand. You notice words and phrases without forcing it. You pick up on expressions, tone, and emotion because you want to know what happens next or what the punchline is. I remember a listener from Paris who told me she loved watching a popular English reality show about home renovations. At first, she felt embarrassed because it wasn't a traditional learning resource. But she realized that every episode made her laugh, kept her interested, and introduced her to everyday conversational English, expressions, slang, and casual phrases that you don't usually find in textbooks. Her listening improved more in 3 months of this fun practice than in years of classroom learning. She said, "I never thought reality TV could teach me so much English." The key is to find material that you look forward to. When you do, listening becomes less about studying and more about entertainment. And that means you'll do it more often, with less effort and more joy. For example, if you like humor, try listening to short stand-up comedy clips or funny podcasts in English. They often use simple language, everyday topics, and lots of repetition and jokes, which helps with memory. If you prefer stories, choose fictional series or radio dramas with voices and emotions that draw you in. If you enjoy real people's lives, follow interviews or lifestyle vlogs by English speakers from different parts of the world. The possibilities are endless. Also, don't be afraid to mix things up. Your taste might change day to day, and that's fine. Sometimes you want something light and funny. Other days, maybe a motivational talk or a fascinating documentary captures your attention. The important part is that you're choosing based on what feels right for you at the moment, not what someone else says is best or correct. This freedom makes learning sustainable and personalized. Another great thing about following what you love is that you'll naturally build a connection with the content creator or speaker. You'll hear their voice, their expressions, their style repeatedly. This familiarity makes listening easier and more enjoyable. You'll start anticipating phrases and jokes. You might even find yourself mimicking their tone or favorite expressions in your own speaking practice. This kind of emotional connection can turn your listening practice into something that feels less like work and more like friendship. One challenge some learners face when they start listening to more casual or entertainment-based content is that sometimes the language is very informal or the accents are strong. That's true, and it can feel difficult at first. But don't let that discourage you. Remember that all real English learning involves some challenge. When you're curious and engaged, your brain wants to overcome those challenges. Plus, there's always a community of learners and resources online to help if you get stuck. You can look up words or phrases after listening or listen again to the parts you find tricky. In fact, listening to content you love actually gives you more motivation to do these extra steps. When you enjoy what you hear, you want to understand more deeply. You want to join conversations with friends, share jokes, or comment online. This natural motivation is the engine of real progress. So if you feel stuck in your listening practice, ask yourself, what do I love? What kinds of stories, voices, or topics make me want to listen? Maybe it's a travel vlog from London, a cooking show from New York, a podcast about everyday life in Toronto, or a comedy special from Dublin. Whatever it is, choose that. Give yourself permission to enjoy it without guilt or judgment. The best listening practice is the one that you'll actually do, again and again, because it feels good. I want you to imagine what learning would be. Like if every time you listened to English, it felt like a small gift, like discovering a new joke, a new story, or a new friend. That's the kind of listening practice that helps you build natural fluency, not by pushing hard, but by staying curious and connected. So don't be afraid to choose what feels right for you. Your brain, your motivation, and your confidence will thank you for it. I want to tell you about Thomas, a listener from Paris, whose journey with English listening is a wonderful example of how changing your approach can open doors you didn't expect. Thomas was someone who believed that the only real way to improve his English was by watching serious business videos, lectures, or news broadcasts. He thought this kind of content was the most valuable because it was formal, structured, and seemed educational. So he spent a lot of time watching corporate interviews, economic reports, and professional presentations. But honestly, he found them incredibly boring. The language was stiff, the topics didn't interest him, and after a while, he stopped paying attention altogether. One evening, while browsing online, Thomas stumbled upon a short clip from a late-night stand-up comedy show. He wasn't sure what to expect, but something made him press play. As he watched, he found himself laughing out loud, even though he didn't catch every word or punchline. The energy, the humor, and the way the comedian spoke made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. During his English practice, joy. This small moment was a turning point for Thomas. He decided to explore stand-up comedy a little more. He started watching short routines daily, just 5 or 10 minutes here and there. At first, many jokes flew over his head and he wasn't sure why they were funny, but he kept watching because he enjoyed the experience. He noticed that stand-up comedians often repeat certain phrases, tell stories about everyday situations, and use expressions that native speakers really use. The rhythm of their speech was different from business videos. It was lively, casual, and full of emotion. Over time, Thomas's brain began to pick up more and more. He caught familiar jokes, recognized repeated words, and started understanding the punchlines. The laughter he shared with the comedian became a bridge to the language. It made listening fun, and that fun kept him coming back. He realized that this was learning without pressure or fear of making mistakes. He was absorbing real English in a way that felt natural and enjoyable. Thomas also started to feel more connected to the culture behind the language. Stand-up comedy often reflects everyday life, social issues, and shared experiences. By listening to these routines, he gained insight into American humor, values, and ways of thinking. This cultural connection helped him understand the language in context, not just as a list of words or grammar rules. It gave meaning to what he was hearing. I remember Thomas telling me that after a few weeks of this new approach, he noticed a big difference in his listening skills. When he watched other types of English content, like movies or podcasts, he felt less lost. The rhythms, expressions, and humor he had learned from comedy routines started popping up everywhere. He also felt more confident in conversations, especially when he tried to make jokes or use casual phrases. His English didn't sound textbook anymore. It sounded real. What I love about Thomas's story is how it shows that there is no one right way to learn English. What matters is finding something that works for you and that you enjoy. If serious business videos bore you, that's okay. You don't have to force yourself to listen to something that doesn't motivate you. Instead, Find something that makes you smile or laugh or feel curious. Stand-up comedy might be the perfect choice for you. Or maybe it's music, or storytelling podcasts, or sports commentary. The key is that you feel engaged. I also want to highlight that learning through stand-up comedy might feel challenging at first, because comedians often use slang, cultural references, and fast speech. But don't let that discourage you. The goal isn't to understand every joke on the first try. It's to enjoy the process, notice patterns, and gradually build your ear for natural English. You can watch short clips multiple times, read transcripts if you want, or discuss the jokes with friends or language partners. Each step brings you closer to fluency. Thomas's experience reminds me that laughter and joy are powerful tools for learning. When you connect emotionally to the material, your brain releases chemicals that help memory and focus. Learning becomes less about effort and more about experience, and the more you enjoy it, the more you'll want to practice. If you're wondering how to start, try searching for short stand-up comedy clips on platforms like YouTube. Look for comedians who speak clearly and talk about everyday topics. Don't worry if you don't get everything right away. Watch the same clip a few times, listen for phrases you recognize, and let yourself laugh. Over time, you'll find that your listening skills improve naturally, and your confidence grows. And you'll discover a whole new way to enjoy English that feels less like study and more like fun. Thomas's story shows us that learning English isn't just about books and formal lessons. It's about connection, culture, and yes, even laughter. When you find the right material, your listening practice becomes something you look forward to every day. And that's when real progress happens. I want to talk about something that many learners find confusing or even frustrating: the feeling that you're not ready to speak English yet. You've studied grammar, learned vocabulary, maybe even practiced speaking a little, but when it comes to real conversations, you hesitate, you stumble, or you feel lost for words. And then you wonder, why can't I speak fluently yet? What am I missing? I want to reassure you today that this is completely normal, and more importantly, that understanding comes before speaking. Fluency in speaking doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't start with speaking itself, it starts with listening. Think about music for a moment. Imagine you want to play a song on the piano or guitar. You can't just pick up the instrument and play it perfectly on your first try, right? You have to listen to the song many times. You listen to the melody, the rhythm, the timing. You let it sink into your brain and your muscle memory. Over time, you start humming the tune, tapping your fingers to the beat, and finally, you begin to play. Language learning works the same way. Before your mouth can produce natural, fluent English, your brain needs to have a rich internal library of sounds, phrases, and rhythms. That library is built through listening. Listening is your brain's way of collecting the raw materials you need for speaking. When you listen to English regularly, whether it's through podcasts, movies, conversations, or music, you're absorbing patterns. You're learning how native speakers link words together, how they stress certain syllables, how they use intonation to show questions, excitement, or doubt. All of these details live in your internal audio library, even if you don't realize it. And when you finally start to speak, your brain pulls from that library to help you sound more natural. So if you don't feel ready to speak yet, please don't feel discouraged or pressured. Listening is powerful practice all on its own. When you focus on listening first, you're preparing yourself for success. You're training your brain to understand English as it's really spoken, not just the textbook version. This helps reduce that overwhelming feeling when someone talks quickly or uses expressions you don't know. You'll recognize more, your brain will work faster, and you'll feel more confident, even before you say a word. I've worked with many learners who felt stuck because they were trying to speak before they had enough listening practice. One learner from Munich told me that she spent a lot of time practicing speaking alone, repeating sentences, and memorizing dialogues. But she still felt nervous in conversations. When she shifted her focus to listening, watching her favorite TV shows with subtitles, listening to podcasts on her daily walks, and paying attention to how people actually spoke, everything changed. She began to recognize chunks of language, sentence rhythms, and pronunciation patterns. After a few weeks, her speaking became more fluid and less stressful because her brain was better prepared. Listening also helps you build your pronunciation naturally. When you hear native speakers over and over, you start to imitate their sounds, even without realizing it. Your mouth gets used to the movements, the sounds, and the melody of English. This natural imitation is much more effective than trying to learn pronunciation rules from a book. It's like learning to sing a song by ear rather than by reading sheet music. Another important point is that fluent listening expands your vocabulary in context. When you hear a word or phrase used in a story or conversation, you understand how it fits naturally with other words. You learn not just the meaning, but the feeling and the tone. This makes it easier to remember and use later when you speak. It also helps you avoid mistakes that come from translating directly from your native language. I want you to remember that everyone's learning journey is unique, but one universal truth is that great speakers are great listeners first. When you listen well, your brain is doing the heavy lifting of language processing. You're creating connections and patterns that will make speaking easier and more automatic. So, if you're worried that you're not speaking yet, or you feel like you're slow to start, that's okay. Keep listening. Make it a daily habit. Listen to things you enjoy and focus on how the language sounds. Notice the flow, the rhythm, and the way phrases connect. The more you listen, the richer your internal library becomes. And one day, you'll find that speaking feels natural because your brain has been ready all along. Listening is not just a step in learning English, it's the foundation. Without strong listening skills, speaking can feel like building a house on shaky ground. But with good listening practice, you're creating a solid foundation for fluency, confidence, and joy in speaking. So be patient with yourself. Trust the process. Listen deeply. Your speaking skills will follow naturally. One of the biggest challenges learners face when listening to native English speakers is understanding the natural flow of the language. It's not just about vocabulary or grammar, it's about how English sounds in real life. Today, I want to share some practical ideas on how you can train your ear to catch the flow of native English, focusing on things like stress, intonation, and connected speech. These might sound like technical terms, but once you understand them simply, they can change your listening experience dramatically. First, let's talk about stress. In English, not every word in a sentence is equally important. Native speakers naturally emphasize one or two words, the key words that carry the main meaning, and they say the other words more quickly and quietly. For example, in the sentence, I want to go to the store, the stressed words might be want and store. The other words like I, to, and the are softer, and sometimes even almost disappear in speech. That's why sometimes you hear something like, I want to go to the store, or I gotta see you later. The sounds blend together, and some parts are less clear, but the stressed words stand out. When you listen with this in mind, you don't have to understand every single word to get the meaning. Instead, you focus on catching the stressed words and the rhythm of the sentence. This is like listening for the beats in music. If you catch those beats, you can follow the meaning even if some small words are unclear. It helps your brain relax because you're not trying to translate every word, you're catching the feeling of the sentence. Next, intonation is another important part of the flow. Intonation is the rise and fall of the voice as we speak. It shows emotions, questions, statements, surprise, or uncertainty. For example, when someone asks a question like, "Are you coming?" their voice rises at the end. When they make a statement like, "I'm coming," their voice falls. Intonation gives life and meaning to words beyond their dictionary definitions. Listening to these patterns helps you understand not just what is being said, but how it's being said. This is why sometimes a phrase can sound very different depending on the speaker's tone, even if the words are the same. The third piece is connected speech, which means native speakers often link words together so they sound like one long word or phrase. For example, "What are you doing?" often sounds like "what you doing" or "gonna" instead of "going to." This linking makes the speech faster and smoother, but can be confusing if you expect to hear each word clearly and separately. Understanding connected speech is like learning the secret code of English. When you get it, you'll start recognizing patterns and phrases much faster. I want you to know that catching the flow of English is not about hearing every single word perfectly. It's about tuning in to the overall sound and feeling of the sentence. Imagine listening to a song in a language you don't know well. You might not understand every word, but you can feel the mood, the emotion, the rhythm. The same happens with English. When you practice listening for stress, intonation, and connected speech, You're training yourself to feel the language. One way to practice. This is to listen to short dialogues or clips and try to identify the stressed words first. You can even try repeating them out loud, emphasizing the same words. Then pay attention to how the pitch of the speaker's voice goes up or down. Try to copy that intonation. Finally, listen for words that blend or connect and try to say them the same way. This kind of active listening helps your brain tune into real English the way native speakers use it every day. I remember a learner from Amsterdam who struggled with fast English. She told me she was always trying to catch every word, but ended up confused and tired. When I explained the idea of stress and connected speech, she tried listening to a podcast episode 3 times. First, just for the main stressed words, then focusing on intonation, and finally on how words connected. She said it was like a light bulb went on. Suddenly, the English felt less like a puzzle and more like music. Her comprehension improved and she felt more confident. Listening to conversations. So don't worry if you don't understand every word. Focus on catching the heartbeat of the sentence, the main words, and the way the speaker's voice moves. This will help you follow the meaning even if some small parts are unclear. The more you practice, the more natural this becomes. It's a skill that grows quietly but powerfully, turning you from someone who struggles to catch every word into someone who understands English as a whole, a live language. Listening to the flow of English takes time and patience, but it's one of the most effective ways to improve your understanding and eventually your speaking. When you catch the rhythm and the melody, English will start to sound less like a foreign language and more like something familiar, something you can join in with confidence. I want to speak to you from the heart today, because I know how easy it is to get caught up in the idea of perfection when learning English. So many learners tell me, Julia, I feel like I'm not good enough yet, or I wish I could understand every word, or I'm afraid of making mistakes when I speak. I understand those feelings because I've seen them in so many people, and maybe you feel them too. But I want to gently remind you that perfection is not the goal. Connection is. When you listen to English and you understand enough to respond, to laugh at a joke, or to react naturally in a conversation, you are already listening fluently. Fluency is not about knowing every word or understanding every single sentence perfectly. It's about being able to connect with what you hear, to feel the meaning, to follow the flow, and to participate. If you can do that, you are making real progress. I want you to imagine for a moment that English is a tool, not a test. It's a tool you use to connect with people, to share ideas, to enjoy stories, and to express yourself. When you think of English this way, you can start to let go of the pressure to be perfect. You don't need to get a perfect score on a quiz or understand every single word in a movie. What matters is that you keep showing up, keep trying, and keep engaging with the language in ways that feel meaningful to you. I often remind my listeners that language is alive. It's messy, it's imperfect, and it's full of surprises. Native speakers themselves make mistakes, use slang, and sometimes speak unclearly. So if you don't catch every word, or if you stumble over a phrase, that's completely normal. It doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're learning. Every time you listen, every time you speak, you're building a connection with English that gets stronger and more natural. I know it can be scary to make mistakes or to not understand everything, but I want you to see those moments as part of the journey, not obstacles. When you laugh at a joke even if you only catch part of it, you're connecting. When you answer a question even if your sentence isn't perfect, you're connecting. When you follow the main idea of a story even if some words are unclear, you're connecting. That connection is what makes language learning meaningful and rewarding. You might find it helpful to remind yourself that no one expects you to be perfect. Friends, teachers, and even strangers appreciate your effort to communicate more than your ability to use flawless grammar or vocabulary. People connect with your intention and your willingness to engage. That's what opens doors. That's what builds relationships. And that's what turns learning into a joyful experience. Another thing I want to share is the power of showing up consistently. Perfection can make us freeze or procrastinate because we feel we have to get everything right at once. But progress comes from small steps, repeated over time. When you keep listening, speaking, and practicing, even imperfectly, you're building habits and confidence. You're teaching your brain that English is not a barrier, but a bridge. And that makes all the difference. I remember a learner from Lisbon who was so focused on perfect pronunciation and grammar that she rarely spoke to anyone. She was afraid of making mistakes. When we talked, I encouraged her to start small. Just respond to what she heard, smile, and join the conversation even if it wasn't perfect. She did, and slowly she noticed her confidence grow. More important than perfection was her connection with people. She started to enjoy English in real life, and her skills improved. Naturally. So today, I invite you to practice kindness toward yourself. Celebrate the moments when you understand enough to enjoy a story, catch a phrase that makes you smile, or join a conversation. These moments are victories. Let go of the need to be perfect. Focus on connection, connecting with the language, with other people, and with yourself as a learner. English is a tool to build bridges, not a test to pass perfectly. Keep showing up, keep listening, keep engaging. You're doing better than you think. Every step you take, no matter how small, moves you closer to fluency. And fluency is not about perfection. It's about connection. That's the true heart of learning English. Today, I want to invite you to take a small but powerful step on your English listening journey. It's a simple challenge, but it can make a big difference when done consistently. The idea is to choose one piece of English content today, something that takes 5 minutes or less. It could be a short podcast episode, a quick video clip, a song you like, or even a brief conversation you overhear. The important part is that it feels interesting or enjoyable to you, so you're motivated to listen. Once you've picked your piece, listen to it twice. The first time, just listen naturally. Don't worry about understanding every word. Let the sounds, the rhythm, and the feelings wash over you. The second time, listen more actively. Pay attention to phrases or expressions that catch your ear. When something stands out, maybe a phrase that's new, funny, or sounds useful, write it down. This could be as simple as, sounds good to me, or I'll catch you later. Writing helps your brain notice and remember these pieces of real English. After you've written down your phrase, say it aloud 3 times. This simple act of repetition helps you practice pronunciation and internalize the natural flow of English. Saying it out loud makes a big difference compared to just reading or listening silently. It trains your mouth to move naturally and your brain to connect the sounds with meaning. Plus, repeating a phrase 3 times isn't too hard to fit into your day, and it builds confidence gradually. I know this challenge might feel small, especially if you're used to thinking that learning English requires hours of study or complicated exercises. But that's the point. Small, focused steps add up over time. Consistency is more powerful than intensity. When you do something simple and doable every day, you build habits that lead to real progress. You start to feel more comfortable with English sounds, rhythms, and expressions. You begin to understand more naturally. I also encourage you to share what you chose or how the challenge felt in the comments. If you're listening on a platform that allows it, sharing your experiences connects you with others who are on the same journey. It creates a supportive community where we learn from each other. Reading about what other learners listen to or the phrases they find useful can inspire you and give you ideas for your own practice. If you prefer, you can also simply reflect quietly after your practice. Think about how it felt to listen carefully, to focus on one phrase, and to say it out loud. Maybe you noticed something about the pronunciation or rhythm that surprised you. Maybe you felt a little more confident or curious. These reflections help you become more aware of your learning process and keep you motivated. Remember, this challenge isn't about perfection or understanding everything perfectly. It's about showing up, paying attention, and connecting with English in a way that feels manageable and enjoyable. It's about building your listening muscles gently and consistently. So, let's begin this together. Today, choose your 5-minute piece of English content. Listen twice, write down one phrase, and say it aloud 3 times. That's your daily listening practice. Simple, right? But over time, these small moments will transform your ability to understand and enjoy natural English. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here with you, and so is our whole English Talk community. We're all learning, practicing, and growing together. Each little step you take is part of a bigger journey toward fluency. Keep going, keep listening. You're doing great.